Today we're joined by Bud Jackson, who's head of Jackson Group Media and also the associate of Aurora Strategy Global. Bud, great to see you.
Hey, good morning, Marcel.
So, Bud, since we last talked a number of weeks ago, a lot has changed in American politics. Certainly the numbers have now tightened up, and Democrats could be looking at losing both the House and potentially the Senate. A number of factors have played into this, so let's get right down to it. What's your take?
Well, I think, first of all, we shouldn't overreact to tightening because polls in elections generally tighten as we get closer to the election. People go back to their polls in each side of the party, and then we're left with a small sliver still left to be decided. So to some extent, I'm not surprised that the polls have tightened here. Things that are also at play is, gas prices started to creep up a little bit. The president down here released some more of the strategic reserve to hopefully help with that, and they've started to ease a little bit more. So Democrats are a little bit nervous about that. There is concern in different states on different messaging and whether or not the Democrats are on the right messaging, specifically in Nevada, where we've been harping on the abortion issue and pro-choice in that race. We should not be talking more about the economy. So people are a little bit more concerned about Nevada and the Senate race specifically. And then in Pennsylvania, it's a little bit, what I would describe as a little too close for comfort in that the Senate race is within almost the margin of error between Fetterman and Mehmet Oz there. The Democratic nominee suffered a stroke in that race early on. He's had a difficult time campaigning to recover from that. There have been disputes over debates. So he is sort of underperforming where he should be, in my opinion. And all you have to do is look at the candidate for governor there, whose name is Josh Shapiro. He's running against a right-wing, what I would identify as an extremist pro-Trumper named Doug Mastriano. And he has over a 10-point lead there. So if he's got over a 10-point lead and Fetterman is, operating within a margin of error, that is, not boding well. So moving forward on the House side of things, the structure of the House race is already sort of in history, for that matter, with the Democratic president in office already favored the Republicans to begin with. So it was always sort of a reach for Democrats to hope that we could take or maintain control of the House there. So I'm not that optimistic that we keep control of the House. I am optimistic that, we keep the majority in the Senate, however. So it could almost be I don't want to say a status quo election, a status quo back in the old days where we have, one chamber Republican and one Democrat, and at least we'll have the Democratic president if things work well. Some people are saying, hey, maybe the Democrats could lose the Senate. It's entirely possible. Anything could happen still. We're still, we're a couple weeks away. As you know, Marcel, from being in the business, we're a lifetime away from Election Day, and who knows what's going to happen between now and, who knows what happens internationally, how that impacts inflation here.
So that's a good point. Let me jump in on that point. Inflation is now starting to recede, but we're seeing huge numbers in terms of fresh produce, double-digit increases on staples, bread, milk, dairy products. A lot of Americans are getting sticker shock when they go to their local grocery store. And a lot of people are ascribing blame to the president's policies. How is that weighing in overall in this election?
It is having an impact. How much people ascribe to the president depends really on, I suppose, who you ask and the pollster asking the question, how they're forming the question. I will say this, that gas prices have a more immediate and noticeable impact, whereas grocery prices are noticeable, but probably not as impactful as you'll see in the gas, because it really impacts on a day-to-day basis people going to and from work, for example. So that's the indicator that I am most concerned about when I look at what's going on with inflation. So hopefully that number from a Democratic perspective will sort of remain steady, at least through the election. But the other
Well,
thing
sorry.
one other important on inflation, Marcel, and I know I'm droning on morning already, is that inflation is impactful here, but wages are still relatively high here, and unemployment is still relatively low. So we haven't started to see job loss. So if that became a huge factor, it's a whole nother ballgame. But I think that savings here in the United States, personal savings, household savings, are just starting to go down. I don't think we've reached that critical mass where inflation is just everybody's up in arms, angry, and they want to throw out everyone in office. We're just not there yet.
Well, it's a tipping point. You're right. It hasn't quite reached it. When I look at inflation, I agree with you that the gas prices are the ones that I watch because people drive by gas stations every day, whereas they go shopping maybe once a week. So they're not seeing it on a regular basis, the price differences. But one thing that is happening is that the Fed has increased the borrowing rate, shocking, 75 basis points in the last round, and they're expected to increase it again. That means mortgages and buying a home are going to cost more for people, and those people who are renewing mortgages are going to face sticker shock when they go to their local bank or mortgage company.
Yes, but to the numbers extent needed to influence an election is one thing. I'd be more concerned in terms of voters' minds right now of people that are watching their 401k and retirement accounts, which have taken a wallop over the last year.
And 20% down on the S&P index.
Exactly. So look, it's a concern, and all this stuff is sort of swirling around in the pot right now as we head into Halloween season. And who knows what kind of
well, you just raised it. So let me ask you, are we expecting an October surprise?
Well, I guess you have to look at there will be an October surprise in many races. There's October surprises in races I'm already working in, but it's not like we have a presidential race on the ballot where it would be one national October surprise. Who knows? Maybe Saudi Arabia gets really annoyed with something and decides they want to cut production even more and really stick it to us. I'd like to say that I'm not seeing any October surprise, but it wouldn't be a surprise if there weren't a surprise.
Let me jump into, we touched on the fact that there's not a presidential race, but former President Trump is still being an influence in the various elections. He's out there campaigning for a number of candidates. I think it was the Brookings Institute that did a study and showed that 269 candidates for office at both the House and Senate combined, 269, were what they call election deniers. And so how is that having an impact on this race, on this election season?
I don't think the full extent of the impact will be known until the election comes. And the reason I say that is because in many ways, Democrats have benefited from really sort of extreme people that supported Trump being nominated by their party. And as a consequence of that, we may very well win some races that could have been even tighter. The governor's race in Pennsylvania, we talk about Pennsylvania again. In Pennsylvania, the governor's race, the Democratic nominee who has that 10-point lead has a 10-point lead because his opponent is a Trump person who is to the far right of the spectrum and, again, in my opinion, nutsoid. Had they nominated a more moderate person, they would have had a better shot of winning there. And the same, with the Senate race there, with Mehmet Oz is kind of look, he's another reality TV person. So he's actually doing better because he's not as crazy as the nominee for governor there in that state. And you're seeing that in Georgia, where Herschel Walker was a Trumper, and we're seeing that poll is tight now. But frankly, we're doing better than expected, I think, there, even with the incumbent. Had they nominated a more reasonable, moderate Republican, they probably would be taking that seat away, or at least even closer. So I don't know what's going to happen in that race yet, which is why I say we're not going to know the full extent of his impact until after the election. And that can also be said in terms of who gains power in some of these seats and Secretary of State's races. beyond the elections, if election deniers are seated in important positions in states across the country, especially positions that oversee U.S. elections like Secretary of State races, could have profound impact that we won't realize until next year when the people are sworn in.
So you mentioned the race in Georgia between Herschel Walker, former NFL superstar, and Senator Warnock, who won in the special election 2 years ago. So that race is tightening up, and notwithstanding that he's had a number of scandals that he's been exposed to.
Right. That goes back to sort of how I initially started on races tightening up. That race is going to tighten up naturally no matter what. So I wasn't surprised by that. And Herschel Walker hasn't exactly had a good couple of weeks, whereas he holds up a toy badge at a debate. And it was
a real badge. Honorary sheriff.
Okay, Herschel Jr. I got one. I think I got one too at Toys R Us a few years ago. And I wish I had one as a prop to hold up to you right now. So between that and he just admitted that he had, sent the check for $700, although he claims he doesn't know what it was for, to his former wife, I suppose. He hasn't had good weeks. So it's not like the polls should be moving in his favor as a result of these as some sort of positive catalyst for him. So yes, the polls have tightened, but I still think that Warnock pulls that off.
And in Texas, it looks like Beto O'Rourke is not going to be able to unseat the current Texas governor. A lot of people had high hopes on Beto O'Rourke. He made a splash when he ran for the Democratic nomination, but hasn't been able to really solidify his appeal beyond a very narrow segment of the population.
Stop me if you haven't heard this story before. It's like the same thing, different day. Oh, he started off great. He sucked up a lot of money. People are so excited about him, but he's going to come up short. Texas is a tough place to run and win for governor right now. And Beto has run a good campaign, an aggressive campaign, but it's just tough. And the numbers may not be there for him. Democrats have what I call a problem occasionally with falling in love with a candidate or two who may not even have a shot at winning, but dumping a ton of money in because they produced a very slick video, they have a great story, or our hearts get ahead of our minds and we waste a lot of money in these races. So I don't want to say that's the case about Beto historically, but I wasn't convinced that we're ever going to win that race to begin with. So it is what it is at this point.
And in the governor's race in Florida, looks like the Republicans will hold on just barely. And we saw that President Biden was in Florida and standing shoulder to shoulder with DeSantis, the senator for Florida. But no real surprise in that race, I would take it.
No, but as we said earlier, who knows what can happen in the next couple of weeks. Hope remains eternal is all I can say. But yeah, it's not great.
Okay. Is there any race that you think could potentially be an upset, be either in the House or in the Senate?
Honestly, I am been in this business long enough that anything can happen, and because we're still 2 weeks out, I feel like we're still a lifetime away. The people sitting at home on their couches who aren't in politics, they don't understand probably the extent that we do that, things happen, to say it nicely. So I'm going to reserve judgment, and we'll just see what happens over the next couple of weeks. The election is close, I'll say that.
Oh, you think it'll be? And what about voter turnout? There's being talk that this election will see even less people vote than in previous elections.
Yeah, I think that really depends on the state and whether or not it's a battleground state as well. I haven't dipped into it, but you can probably start looking at some vote by mail statistics to see how in some states, like Pennsylvania is just starting. I think Massachusetts probably started as well. There are states, these battleground states that we've been talking about, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, I think that they'll probably have decent turnout. But if you look at other states where not as much is happening, where millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, millions of dollars are being poured in, where they're not happening, turnout probably won't be as brisk as those other states.
Mm-hmm. And, not that international issues affect domestic politics, but in some cases they do. The ongoing war in Ukraine and the use of drones against Ukraine, as well as cutting oil and energy supplies to Europe, is there a possibility of drawing in the U.S., and will that have any impact on U.S. voters?
It's already having an impact. The war in the Ukraine is causing this spike in gas prices and oil prices, and President Biden has been pretty explicit about that, and which is why they keep calling it Putin's war and Putin's price increases, etc. And I just read a story that Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, said the Republicans might not support more aid to Ukraine if they take the majority. So these things are filtering in, have already been largely at play, especially on the inflation side of things when it comes to this election. So yes, there are international inputs factor U.S. elections, and that's one input. What happens in the UK even, impacts inflation. And we just saw the Prime Minister resign about an hour ago. So that'll impact the stock market. It'll go up, it'll go down. People's retirements will go up and go down to make people uneasy. And that's what we got to that's why I say anything can happen in the next 2 weeks. All these little things, happen, and maybe there'll be a big bump in the road on the way there too. Who knows?
All right. The U.S. election is the first Tuesday of November. That will be Tuesday, November help me on this one, 8th?
8th, yes.
Okay. So
I need sleep. Everyone in our business needs sleep this time of year.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm in local elections here in Canada, so I'm not getting much sleep either. But want to have you on after the 8th and talk about winners, losers, and what the impact is going forward. Bud Jackson is president of Jackson Group Media and also an associate of Aurora Strategy Global. Thanks so much.